I would like to start by thanking, and thanking you all, and I can't even start to describe how proud I feel to witness this joint effort by the Palestinian community, the Jewish community, and I like to reiterate on these both together because they are the living proof that the Palestinian struggle is in no way religious, despite the immense efforts by the apartheid structure to display it as such. But even that task force cannot win alone. So we, of course, are very happy to have the human rights organizations and for them all to be here today, trying and aiming to shed a light on the grave injustices that have been taking place for way too long against the indigenous Palestinian community by Israel. As we are sadly still working hard today in hopes of opening the taboo apartheid conversation in Canada, the consensus towards this verdict has been immensely growing among reputable global human rights organizations and even beyond. Today, more than 450 civil society groups, organizations, unions, movement, political parties, officials in different capacities, intellectuals, authors, publishers, etc., have supported these determinations. As you examine the reports, you can see that each organization looked at the issue from its own perspective and used its own tools and methodologies. Yet, they have all come to the same outcomes and eventually the same conclusion. Do you know why? It's just because all paths created by Israel led to that recommendation. It leads us to its apartheid structure. You can't miss it because millions of Palestinians in Israel and in Palestine, and refugee camps all around the world live it daily. We just need to take a step back and look at the complete picture, beyond the noise and the propaganda created to shield the perpetrators, and whitewash the disease by focusing on its symptoms, or worse, by hiding behind labels, as Corey, my dear friend, just said, of hate, discrimination, and anti-Semitism. The occupation needs to end. Apartheid needs to be dismantled. There are no two parties to this, no to either of those injustices. There is just one nuclear settler colonial occupation that is unfortunately supported currently by the free and has been always supported by the free world. The Palestinian people have been paying a hefty price for decades for standing their ground and calling for their freedom. Their only hope is for the international community to take responsibility and do what it preaches. Yet sadly, many liberal democracies, including Canada, not only stand silent in the face of all the atrocities the Palestinians face, but also reject any international tool that could lead Israel to stand accountable for its crimes. The reports calling out Israel's apartheid are rejected under the pretext that they are biased and unfair to Israel. But the other reports have been also rejected, like those issued by other human rights organizations which do not speak about apartheid, but call things as they are on the ground and call out Israel's occupation. Reports by UN rapporteurs were rejected, even when Israel would not let them on Palestinian ground to witness what is happening and have that opportunity. And most recently, when the UNHRC inquiry report found that Israel practices of occupation and discrimination against Palestinians are the root cause of the last year's violence, no reasons, no discussions, again, rejection. Everything is rejected without any reasoning or a way for discussing the matter. Everything comes down to maintaining Israel's impunity. The Palestinians can provide millions of entries for decades of violations of international law and human rights against them. They can also provide all measures taken against them by the international community during many decades, and especially since the peace process broke down. Palestinians have been bullied time and time again to appease Israel's wishes, denied funds, harassed about their curriculums, TV broadcasting, anything that would mention the grisly reality that they live in. The UNRWA is fighting its last breath just because Israel wants the world to forget the atrocities of Nakba and how this whole story came to be. But today, the Palestinians stand here asking you, the promoters and defenders of human rights and champions for democracy? What accountability measures have ever been applied towards the violations of your steadfast ally? Anything other than calculated condemnations, which carried no weight on Israel. And I don't think we can make a list here. So yes, there is bias and prejudice. There is injustice, all of which are aimed at Palestine and the Palestinian people. These people who are fed up for asking for their right to exist, people who are fed up from anti-Palestinianism. I want to leave you with a few cases just to think about. But before that, I just want to thank you all for coming and taking the first step to just listen. And I hope that next comes the talk, the discussion, and action. 2 days ago marked a month since the day Shireen Abu Akleh was assassinated. And we are no closer to bringing to justice her murderers, even though they're known. We are not even any closer to the international independent investigation that so many have called for. Basel Adra lives in Masafir Yatta. You can find his account on Twitter. He paints his and his community's struggle being pushed out of their homes daily. The Israelis are stealing, Israel as a structure is stealing their land, and the army is performing raids, destroying homes and throwing people out. Some instances, they put people on trucks with their things to throw them out. And no, it's not 1948. This is in 2022. Hussam Fatafta lies in an ICU after performing an operation to his head from the damage that was inflicted by Israeli soldiers who kept hitting him and stepping on his head with their boots, fracturing his skull, then leaving him to bleed while preventing others from aiding him. Why? Because he dared to say no to Israel stealing his land in Tarqumia. Ziad Ghanem, a child, 14, 15 years old, he was on his way from his house to his grandfather's house when soldiers started to shoot at him. Before he got shot, he was pleading with the soldier not to kill him. And yet he shot him in his face, in his back, multiple shots. And lastly, I want you to imagine this picture. I think about it a lot. There's a Jewish baby somewhere in the world growing in his mom's tummy. Let's say in Hungary, in UK, or maybe France. His parents might have never traveled to Israel, and this baby might never, ever travel to Israel. And yet, this baby has the right to travel, live in Israel, and in my grandfather's house in Safad, while my grandfather is still living in a refugee camp in Lebanon 7 decades later and can't leave. This Jewish baby and his family have nothing to do with this dilemma, and neither does my grandfather. If this doesn't spell apartheid to you, I don't really know what would. Thank you so much.